Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Meeting House, where we have conversation on religion and American life. I'm your host, Dr. Dwight A. Moody. Introducing a two-part interview today with the Reverend Dr. Tory Baucum. He has a very interesting history, beginning out in Kansas City under Quaker influence, ending up with his entry into the Roman Catholic Church just a couple of years ago. He now is the director of the Benedictine Center for Family Life at Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas. We're going to talk to him about his experiences in Poland over the last few years in part one, and then in part two, his own personal history. Dr. Baucum, you've just returned from Poland, your sixth trip in a year. Tell us what happened on this last trip.
Well, the last trip was really two trips separated by 4 days. I had a pilgrimage planned for my college students at Benedictine College, planned for about a year. But then in the interim, I got elected to the Copernicus Academy, which is a hybrid government academic academy that elects scholars from around the world to promote science and learning, kind of under the umbrella of the areas of expertise that Nicholas Copernicus, the great Polish scientist himself, exhibited. So I went to the Copernicus Academy, the inaugural event in Toronto, Poland, which is the home of Copernicus, Nikolai Copernicus, and then I went from there. We had several events rolled up in that one event. Then I came home. Then I took our students to Poland, and that was a pilgrimage that started in Warsaw, went to Wadowice, Krakow, back to Warsaw. Can you hear this background noise?
Mm-mm. No, you're fine.
Okay.
So the Copernicus Society, you went over there, you gave an address.
I did.
Tell us, summarize this address for us.
Well, what I tried to speak to was, something of the intersection of my expertise, which is the study of the history of the domestic church in Christianity, especially as it's been manifested in various times in the catechumenal process.
Now,
so how people are brought into the faith is what that process refers to. And my dissertation was on Augustine and John Wesley, people that we normally don't put together, but they had similar practices in terms of how to initiate people into the Christian faith. So that's maybe my only area of expertise academically. And when I was in Poland 3 days after the invasion, I noticed all of these homes opening up to Ukrainians. And in fact, one of the families that hosted me, they had a Ukrainian family staying with them. It was only 3 days after the invasion. I had dinner one night around a table, and there were literally 15 people there. One family from Ukraine without the father. The father stayed behind, but sent the wife and the children. And then the host family. And I just mentioned to my host, I said, this is the domestic church. He looked at me kind of stunned, didn't realize what it was he was doing. And so I wrote a little Facebook post about it. He translated it into Polish. It went viral. Then 2 months later, I was invited back, or maybe even less, to speak at a Congress in June of last year. And I told my friend, I said, who you really need is this colleague and friend of mine, Rabbi Mark Gopin. Mm-hmm. He's an expert in refugee crises. And so he invited Mark as well. So we both spoke at this Congress last June. And so just one thing keeps leading to another thing, Dwight. After that Congress, that went very well. A number of academics and government officials were there. They liked what I said. So then I got nominated to this Copernican Academy, and I can assure you, no one is more surprised than me. In fact, when they first emailed me, I didn't. It went to a wrong email address. They emailed me back and said, "We haven't heard from you. We sent this 6 weeks ago. We would really love it if you would respond." I said, "I don't think you got the right guy." But anyway, that's how it was. So in my address, I just basically talked about my experience of what I was observing in Poland over a 12-month period of time. And I used that the lens of hospitality to describe, and then I used that lens to look at the deep history of Poland, going all the way back to its Benedictine evangelization, which Benedictine hospitality is core to the Benedictine charism. And yeah, a lot of people's. I've had 2 or 3 scholars, one from Warsaw, one from Jagiellonian, who said, you are saying and seeing things about us that we're not able to say and see. So
it was what you call the domestic church.
Yeah.
That you think is feeding this spirit of hospitality that you saw.
Yeah.
I want you to describe the refugee situation coming out of Ukraine into Poland, what you saw, and the impression that it made on you.
Yeah, well, first let me just say a few statistics, and then I'll give you a few anecdotes.
Okay.
There's about 9 million refugees. That it's a fluid number because it increases depending on what's going on in the war and the weather. But say roughly 9 million. All of those 9 million have passed through Poland on their way to other parts of Europe. About 3 million stick. Now, sometimes it goes down to 1.5 million. Sometimes it goes to 3. Most Ukrainians want to go back to Ukraine. They want the war to be over, so they're not wanting to immigrate to the United States. I mean, there are a few, if they have family in the U.S., who do that. So Poland has really carried the lion's share of this load in Europe. The way I explain it, it's like Poland is propping up Europe in terms of this Ukrainian refugee crisis. And it's not the government, it's actually the Polish families that's propping up the country.
What you call the domestic church.
Yeah, what I call the domestic church. And it's also language that's common in the Vatican II documents. John Paul II taught a lot about it. It's also part of the Baptist tradition. It goes all the way back to Romans 16, when Paul is greeting the church that meets in so-and-so's house. And he lists several household churches. So, I say Christianity began as a domestic movement.
Right.
The family, family households were baptized, and families were facing outward to Roman society in love. And that is at the heart of apostolic Christianity. So I saw this when I was there the first time. I wrote about it, and I kept watching it to develop. I told you this friend of mine, Mikhail, he's a professor of sociology at the University of Warsaw. He and other just average Polish people, not always even devout. This is so much in their DNA. Like I said, they have a saying that says, if a guest is in your home, God is in your home.
Yes, I read that in you said something else that really struck me, that there were from 1.5 to 3 million refugees and not a single refugee camp. This is a striking statement and observation, and talk about it.
Well, I quoted Rabbi Gopin, who on stage last June, he said, I've been doing this work for 30 years, Syria, Balkans, you name it. He said, I've never seen this. I've never seen this huge amount of influx of refugees into another country, and they're not camps to accommodate them. So what they've done is they've opened up hostels, hotels, and homes. And the Polish people, now the government has stepped in, and they've done some really wonderful things. They've worked closely with the Ukrainian government. The 2 departments of education have done a handshake so that students can do hybrid learning. The things they need to learn in Ukrainian, they're learning in Ukrainian. by computer, and then the things they need to learn in Polish, they're learning in Polish in the classrooms. So the government is doing its part. They're giving them free health care. They're allowing them into the job market. They're allowing them to have free transportation. So who picks that up? So the average Pole picks that up. So the Poles are working harder. I think it's the great untold story in what's going on right now.
It is. It's such a terrific story because
yeah.
Migration and refugee streams is a condition all over the world.
Absolutely.
On every continent,
right.
People are having to deal with refugees, and it's a big issue, here in the United States, big political issue. And this is why what you're describing, what you're seeing and describing and celebrating in Poland is such a pattern that the world needs to pay attention to. I think this is your point, isn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I'm trying to do is tell the story anywhere and everywhere I can, because I don't think enough attention is being placed upon it. Yeah, there's a book here. In fact, this is one of the reasons Rabbi Gopin and I have been invited to start a Center for Peace and Solidarity at the University of Warsaw. And this will be one of my tasks coming out of the Copernicus Academy, because, as the people said, he said we didn't have the infrastructure, academic government infrastructure, to seize upon the lessons learned in the solidarity movement. And we don't want to make that same mistake now. We need to learn the lessons of what's happening in this refugee crisis. So they want to study it, but they also want to equip the caregivers in resilience and the skills and the knowledge they need to sustain themselves as they help the Ukrainians get through this crisis. So yeah, it's a story that needs to be told. Like I was saying, I think President Biden really highlighted this when he was in Kiev and Warsaw several weeks ago, which I was delighted to hear him do that, because I think he's the first major figure I've heard anyway who have praised the Poles for this heroic act.
Well, here is a question that comes to my mind. The Polish people are essentially white Christians. The Ukrainians are Slavic but racially white Christians as well. So Europe has just this is the third wave. They've had a wave of Africans come across the Mediterranean. They've had a huge wave of Middle Easterns, Muslims. And I just wonder, is the fact that the Ukrainians are Christians, did this have a bearing on how they were received in Poland? That is, would Muslims be received the same way? Is this a dynamic that you've seen or observed?
Well, I'm not, okay, I can't say too much about the African and Muslims, because I don't know how many tried to get into Poland.
Right.
I can tell you that other similar countries like Hungary have not been nearly as generous
right.
to the Ukrainians.
Right.
And though they are white Christians, I don't think that's more of an American way of looking at it. I
yes.
think over in Eastern Europe, it's more Eastern Orthodoxy and Catholicism. And of course, in Poland and Ukraine, there's this long history of learning how to live together. And there's this faction called the Unite Catholic Church, which is they're in relationship to the Vatican, but their liturgy and a lot of their theology and their discipline is Eastern. So, for example, the priest can marry. And this family
right.
that I stayed with that first night, that was from Ukraine, they were a Unite family. The father, the husband, was a Unite priest. And so there's these instances of reconciliation
mm-hmm.
and building, but there's also a very bitter history between not always, but there's these flashpoints, these moments where there's been a bitter history between Ukrainians and Poles, as well, of course, kind of a constant heartburn with Russia in terms of both of their relationship to Russia. So it's a complex history, and that's all I can say about it. Just like we have complexities in our history that you kind of have to live with before you really understand them. The same is true with them.
Yes, I think you have really introduced a very powerful dynamic into this whole story. How the Ukrainians, in what you call their domestic church, practicing hospitality in their homes, how that is impacting this long history of tension that is both religious and cultural and racial in some regards. So you've got the whole Russian Ruski Mir thing in the background of all of it. You've got all the tension in the worldwide Orthodox Church, and here all these Orthodox Ukrainians are coming into the homes of these Polish Catholics. I think this is such a fascinating angle on this story, and I wonder what kind of research is being done. I'm sure you're not the only one that's paying attention to this. You're perhaps a leading voice on it, but this needs to be researched and written and photographed and filmed, and as a story to the whole world, as you said.
Well, that's one of the reasons the University of Warsaw is interested in starting the center, to do that very thing, to document, to study, to record, because historians are going to want to go over this. There will be books written about this moment.
You need to write a book, Tory.
Yeah, well, I'm doing a lot of other things right now, but in my retirement, I will, Dwight.
No, you can't wait. You need to write a book about this, about your experiences and about what's going on and about the domestic church in Poland. The world needs to hear this. Now, I know everybody's going to see this interview, and publishers are going to call you because they've seen the interview and want you to write a book.
Well, if that happens, I will. If a publisher contacts me, then I'll work with somebody.
Now
Well, really, part of it is just what I'm doing now is gathering the right people, to come with me to Poland and getting the right eyes on this and raising money. So that's where a lot of my energy is going to. It's not, there's a time for reflection and writing later. Right now, it's trying to respond to the crisis and be helpful in the best way I know how. And I'm a good motivator. I'm a good gatherer. I'm a good bridge builder, and that's what they need right now. So,
you mentioned in your speech to the Copernicus Society that two of your great heroes are from Poland, have Polish roots. Name these two and say just a word about both of them.
Yeah, I think the 20th century was the Polish century because of all that they endured. And I think the two great voices in the 20th century were Polish voices. The great Polish poet Czesław Miłosz, who won the Nobel Prize the same year that Karol Wojtyła, the Archbishop of Krakow, became the Bishop of Rome, Pope John Paul II. To me, these are the two great voices of the 20th century. I think they were the two great voices because they endured two of the worst forms of totalitarianism the world has ever seen, Nazism and then Stalinism. And they were both nasty in their own way, degrading of human dignity. And why they were great, I think, is because they dove deep into the sources of human dignity and spoke eloquently and powerfully about the nature of human dignity, which, of course, became a great theme in the UN after World War II.
Yep.
A number of Catholic scholars, not exclusively Catholic, it was a worldwide effort, but Jacques Maritain in particular had a big hand in drafting the UN document on human dignity. And that's a big part of the work I do in Atchison with at-risk families and children, is I work on human dignity issues. So as I say, I'm person-centered about everything. That's the lens at which I try to look at the world. So John Paul II taught me that. Czesław Miłosz, in his own way, his own poetic abilities, did a similar thing for me. So those are my two heroes. That's really why I got interested in going to Poland a dozen years ago. Became friends first with Adam Zagajewski, who is a second generation Czesław Miłosz disciple, and who was considered one of, if not the greatest living poet when he died 2 years ago. But Zagajewski is the first person to invite me to Poland because of an article in the New York Times where I quoted him in some peacemaking work I was doing with the Episcopal Bishop of Virginia. He invited me to come to Poland and meet his friends. It so happened his friends were the left-wing intelligentsia of Poland. And so for 5 or 6 years, they became my friends. And then, of course, when the war started and I became Catholic, I've gotten to know the more traditional Catholic side of the country, and they were also my friends. So that's how it all kind of began. It really began with my reading John Paul II, him getting inside of my head, and I couldn't get him out of my head. And Miłosz was the same way. And I have no rational explanation for it, because as far as I can tell, I have no Polish ancestry. Now, I did have a great uncle who spent some time over there, and he was a little bit wayward, so something could have happened that I'm unaware of. But as far as I know, I have no relatives in Poland.
Did you? I don't suppose you ever met John Paul II. I'm not sure when he died.
2005.
2005, and but he is connected to your work now at the Center for Family Life at Benedictine College. What is that connection?
Well, yeah, we have a fellowship of students called the JP2 Fellows. They're students I work with to work with at-risk families there in Atchison. Atchison is one of the poorest communities in the Midwest. It's one of the reasons I went there. I felt for a long time God was telling me to get off the grid. And when I went to Atchison, I looked around and said, this is off the grid. So, a quarter of the population live below the poverty line and have for 3 generations. And the college is a Benedictine college, and there's, again, this Benedictine charism of hospitality. The college has been flourishing the last 20 years, and they said, we want to help our community. And so a Catholic priest friend of mine in D.C., while I was still kind of I hadn't announced I was becoming Catholic yet, but he put me in touch with them. They started recruiting me and interviewing me, and I went out there to start this work. So we work with at-risk families in Atchison, and then we work with just regular families in the Archdiocese. And then the third pillar is we explored John Paul II's legacy, and that includes taking pilgrimages to Poland. So, yeah, he's very much the patron of our work.
Tory, I want to thank you for talking with us today. In part 2 of this interview, we're going to come back and talk about your larger journey, where you started as a kid, how you and I first met, and then where you are now. It's a fascinating journey. That's going to be part 2. I'm Dwight Moody in the Meeting House with Dr. Tory Baucum. Stay tuned for part 2. Thank you for joining me today with my conversation with the Reverend Dr. Tory Baucum. He is the director of the center, the Benedictine Center for Family Life at Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas. In this first part, he talked about his experience in Poland. He's been to Poland 12 times. It was very instrumental in his conversion, we might say, to Roman Catholicism. He was received into the church just a couple of years ago. But he talks about the influence of the great Polish leaders, Christian leaders, and especially the hospitality that they have shown the Ukrainian refugees. Part 2, we're going to talk to him about his own personal journey. And I'll be back in just a minute with that. Visit our website at themeetinghouse.net. I'm Dwight A. Moody in the Meeting House.